The village of Blackwater Cove had always been a place of whispers. Perched on the edge of a wild, storm-battered coastline, it was a community that looked inward, away from the world. The outside was not welcome here, and for good reason if you believed the old tales. The cliffs loomed high above a restless sea. Every night, waves gnawed at the rocks below, sending a deep, hollow roar into the houses above. Salt clung to every wall and window. Even in summer, the wind never lost its bite. Into this place came Daniel K., an outsider. Daniel wasn't a tourist. He didn't carry a camera or wear the bright waterproofs city visitors wore. His clothes were plain, his face shadowed under a weather-beaten cap. He arrived by the only bus that came to Blackwater Cove, stepping down with nothing more than a backpack and a folded piece of paper. The driver left him there without a word, the bus rumbling away, its taillights fading into mist. At first, no one approached him. Outsiders were rare, and strangers who stayed overnight were rarer still. Daniel didn't seem to mind the cold stares. He walked straight toward the Drift Inn, a creaking, wood-framed building that had seen better days. The innkeeper, Martha Doyle, was a small woman with sharp eyes. She studied him from behind the counter as he asked for a room. "Pay in advance," she said, not unkindly but firmly. "We don't run tabs for people we don't know." Daniel slid a stack of notes across the counter without hesitation. "2 nights," he said. "Maybe more." Martha's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she reached for the key. "2nd floor. Room 4. Sea view." The first night, Daniel unpacked little, just a change of clothes, a notebook, and a silver compass that he placed carefully on the windowsill. Outside, the ocean stretched black and endless. Far in the distance, a pale light blinked, the old Blackwater Lighthouse, abandoned for decades. Locals said the sea had claimed too much land around it, making it unreachable. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The sound of the tide was louder here, almost as if the waves were speaking. Around midnight, he thought he heard footsteps in the corridor outside his room, slow, dragging, deliberate. He opened the door, but the hall was empty. Morning in the village. By morning, word of the stranger had spread. At the small cafe by the harbor, fishermen eyed Daniel over their mugs of tea. He sat alone, flipping through his notebook, occasionally glancing toward the sea. An older fisherman, Tom Barrett, finally spoke. "You looking for something?" he asked, his voice rough from years in the wind. "Someone," Daniel replied. A flicker of unease passed across Tom's face. "Then you're wasting your time. People here don't get lost, they get taken." Daniel looked up sharply. "Taken?" But Tom only shook his head and went back to his tea. The missing girl. That afternoon, Daniel went to the shoreline, where jagged rocks jutted like teeth into the surf. He moved with purpose, as though he knew exactly where to go. Locals watched from a distance, whispering. What Daniel didn't know was that 15 years ago, a girl had vanished from this very spot. Clara Doyle, Martha's niece, had been only 16. She'd gone down to the shore one evening and never returned. The only thing they found was her scarf, tangled in the rocks. Her disappearance was one of several in Blackwater Cove's long, unspoken history, people lost to the tides, or perhaps to something far older, something that lived beneath them. A conversation at the inn. That night, Martha brought him tea, though she hadn't offered it before. "You remind me of someone," she said, setting the cup down. "You've got that same stubborn look Clara had." Daniel's eyes softened. "Clara was my sister." The room went silent. The distant crash of waves filled the gap between them. "I didn't know she had family left," Martha said quietly. She didn't not hear. "I was adopted after our parents died. I was younger. I didn't even know about her until a year ago. I found a letter she'd written. It mentioned this place, and something about the tide." Martha's face tightened. "If you've come for answers, you won't like what you find. Some things in Blackwater are better left in the dark." The tide turns. The next day, a storm rolled in from the sea. The sky turned black, and the wind carried a strange sound, like a low hum, buried deep beneath the crash of the waves. Daniel stood at the shore again, gripping the silver compass. Its needle spun wildly, refusing to settle. A boy from the village, no more than 12, appeared beside him. "They come when the tide is highest," the boy said. "That's when they take people." Daniel crouched to meet his eyes. "Who comes?" The boy pointed toward the water. "The drowned." Lightning flashed, and for an instant, Daniel thought he saw something beneath the surface, pale shapes moving with the current. The night of the storm. By midnight, the village was locked tight. Doors barred, windows latched. Only Daniel moved through the streets, the compass in one hand, a lantern in the other. The wind howled through the narrow lanes, carrying whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Down at the harbor, the tide was unnaturally high. Boats rocked violently, their ropes straining. Out at sea, the pale light of the abandoned lighthouse flickered again, though no one had been there in decades. Daniel stepped onto the rocks where Clara's scarf had been found all those years ago. The compass needle stopped spinning and pointed straight toward the lighthouse. And then, from the depths, came a sound like a voice, calling high. The wind clawed at Daniel's coat as he stood at the edge of the rocks. The compass needle held steady now, locked on that flickering light far across the water. It pulsed once, twice, then vanished. The voice came again, faint, distorted, almost swallowed by the roar of the tide. "Daniel." Daniel's breath caught. It was her voice. Clara's. 15 years gone, but as clear as the day she vanished. The crossing. A thin wooden jetty stretched into the dark water, half swallowed by the tide. The boats tied there shuddered in the storm, their hulls knocking like warning drums. Daniel found one with its oars still inside, a small fishing skiff, barely big enough for one man. The wood groaned under his weight, but it held. The sea was a living thing that night. Every wave rose like a wall, breaking into icy spray that soaked him to the bone. The compass lay in his lap, its needle never wavering from the invisible path toward the lighthouse. Halfway across, the water changed. The swell stopped, and the boat slid forward over something unnervingly still. The air grew heavy. Beneath the surface, pale shapes moved in unison, circling the boat without breaking the water. Daniel gripped the oars tighter.
He didn't dare stop rowing.
The lighthouse. The base of the lighthouse rose from the water like the ribcage of some ancient beast. Stone steps, slick with moss and seaweed, wound upward to a heavy iron door. Daniel hauled himself out of the boat and onto the steps. The tide licked at his boots, higher than it should have been. The iron door stood ajar, swaying slightly with the wind. Inside, the air smelled of salt and something older, something metallic like blood. The spiral staircase climbed into darkness, each step groaning underfoot. Halfway up, Daniel heard a sound above him. Not footsteps exactly, but the slow scrape of something heavy being dragged. The keeper. At the top of the stairs, the lantern room glowed with a cold, unnatural light. In its center stood a figure. It was a man, tall and gaunt, wearing the tattered remains of a lighthouse keeper's coat. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were the color of the sea during a storm, deep, dark, and endless. "You shouldn't have come," the man said. His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of the tide itself. Daniel stepped forward.
"Where is she?"
"Where's Clara?" The keeper's gaze shifted toward the window, where the black water heaved far below. "The sea keeps what it takes." The truth of the tide. The keeper told him the truth, or some version of it. Blackwater Cove had always been bound to the tide. Long before the lighthouse was built, the people of the village made a pact with something beneath the waves. The sea gave them fish, safe harbors, and calm passages, but in return, it demanded lives. Every seventh tide, the keeper said, it calls for one of its own. Clara, he explained, had been chosen. The village never told her. They never tell them. She came to the shore that night, drawn by a voice she couldn't resist. And when the tide was at its highest, the drowned came for her. Daniel's hands tightened into fists. "You let them take her." The keeper's expression didn't change. "I only light the way." The bargain. But there was more. The keeper said the sea would sometimes return what it had taken for a price. If you give yourself to it willingly, the keeper said, it may release the one it holds. But the living cannot walk free without another taking their place. Daniel's chest felt heavy. It was a cruel trade, a life for a life. The keeper stepped aside, revealing the trapdoor in the center of the lantern room. From below came a soft glow, like moonlight filtered through deep water. And within that light, a shadow moved. It was Clara. The reunion. Daniel dropped to his knees, looking down through the trapdoor. She was there, suspended in water that shouldn't have been there, her hair drifting like seaweed, her eyes closed. Her skin was pale but unmarked, as though no time had passed. Clara. Daniel's voice cracked. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, they locked on his. Recognition flared. Danny, she whispered, the sound carrying impossibly through the water. Daniel reached down, his fingers brushing the cold surface. I'm going to get you out. The keeper shook his head slowly. You can't take her from the tide. You can only join her.
The choice.
The storm outside raged harder, the lighthouse shaking with each wave that crashed against it. The glow from the trapdoor brightened, spilling across the walls. Daniel's mind raced. He had come for answers, but now he had something far more dangerous, a choice that could not be undone. He could leave and live, knowing Clara would remain in the sea's grasp forever. Or he could trade places, giving her the life she'd been denied, at the cost of his own. Clara's hand pressed weakly against the water's surface. Her lips formed the word, go. The decision. Daniel smiled sadly. Not without you. He turned to the keeper. How do I do it? The keeper stepped forward, placing a cold, wet hand on Daniel's shoulder. Step into the light. Daniel climbed down into the trapdoor. The water was icy, searing his skin like frost. As it closed over his head, Clara's form grew sharper, clearer. She reached for him, panic in her eyes. And then, with a sudden surge, she was pushed upward, breaking the surface, gasping for air. The return. Clara collapsed onto the lighthouse floor, coughing seawater, her skin warm again. The keeper pulled her to her feet without a word and guided her toward the stairs. She turned back once, her eyes searching for Daniel. But the light below had already dimmed, and the water was empty. The keeper's voice was barely audible over the storm. The tide keeps its bargains. Back in the village. By morning, the storm had passed. The lighthouse stood silent, the sea calm as glass. Clara walked through the village streets in clothes given to her by Martha, each step feeling strange after so many years. The people watched her with a mix of awe and fear. No one ever came back. When she reached the shore, she looked out toward the lighthouse. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure in the lantern room, watching her. Then the light blinked once, twice, and was gone. The tide rolled in, whispering against the rocks. Epilogue. Years later, the villagers would speak in hushed tones about that storm, about the woman who returned from the sea. And sometimes, on the highest tide, they would see a light out at the lighthouse. Some said it was the old keeper. Others said it was Daniel. Either way, the sea still kept its bargains.